All right. And once we know what we're going to be building, let's start by setting up all the imports. And then slowly but surely, we will get to all the logic as well. And I'm going to go here with import use state. Then I'm looking for use effect. And both of them are coming from React. And also, I want to set up my logo, correct? So let's start here from React. And then we're going to go with logo. So import logo. Now this one will be from the components. So we'll go one level up. We're looking in the components. And since we have that index one, we are pretty much in good shape. And after that, we want to go with our wrapper. Now this one will be a wrapper. So that's the name. And then where is it located? Well, we're going to go to assets, then more specifically wrappers, and then all the way there, we'll look for register page. So once we have these imports, then we want to set up that default state. And essentially think of this default state as all our values. So we'll have one for name, we'll have one for email, as well as the password, and we'll toggle between. So not only will change here the values for the heading 3, as well as toggle the input for the name, but we'll also change which function we invoke once we submit, because there's going to be 2 requests, one for register and one for login. And if this doesn't make any sense at the moment, don't worry. It will be clear once we get there. So first, let's start with that initial state. I'll set it up as an object. I'll call this a state. And then inside of it, we're going to go with name. Then we want to set up a email as well. And then password. So let's call this password here. Again, empty string for now. And then, like I said, is member. Doesn't really matter what you set it up. In my case, I'm going to go with a true. Let's save it. And then let's move into the register function. And inside of it, we're going to go with const values. So that's going to be my use state and set values. And then as far as the default value, I'll use my initial state. So use and state, and let's set up the initial state. And as you can already guess, now the values represent this object. And then I have set values function, which essentially will control it. Now, since it's an object, we'll have to do a little bit of magic there. It's not just one value. Now, the reason why I went with this approach, where basically I have the object, well, I have multiple values. So technically I can use multiple use states, but I thought that this is just going to be faster. And then I'll add a comment for my global state and use navigate, because that's coming up. So global state and use navigate. And after this one, we'll set up our handle change and unsubmit. Again, those are just going to be technically dummy functions, because at the moment we'll just be logging them. Just keep in mind that we will need them because we'll be updating these inputs as well as submitting the form. So those are the 2 functions that we'll need. Just for the moment, we'll set up logs. That's it. So const, and I'll call this handle change. So this is going to fire every time we'll type something in one of the inputs. And the way we'll access the values is by using the event object. And then as far as the logic, well, for now, let's just go with, like I said, log. And we'll simply, and by the way, I need to set it up this way. I simply need to go with event and target. So that way we'll see, well, which input are we working on. And then the same will be for handle, submit, or unsubmit. Doesn't really matter. In this case, I went with the same name, but of course you can change it if you want. Again, we will be looking for the event object. We want to prevent the default right away. We want to prevent the default behavior. And then we also want to log. Effectively, when we're talking about target in this case, that is going to be our form. Let's save this. And now let's finally work on the actual return. So first, I want to grab my wrapper. So that's where I have all the styles. And since I have the global class by the name of full page, I'm going to use this one. So I'll say full page. Now let me save it. And now let's navigate to a register here in the browser. So let's say here register, and notice how it is a full page. And that's why this one is sitting in the center. So full page essentially is just setting this up, everything as far as 100%. And then when it comes to wrapper, I have some styles there that places this in the center. So now let me remove this dummy comment, and I actually want to go with form. So that is going to be a form element. Now, as far as the action, well, we'll handle that. So we're not going to use that. Then class name will be form, and pretty much all my form classes are sitting in the index CSS. So if I save here, notice I have a right away form. And that's the case because forms I use in pretty much every project. So it just kind of makes sense that I have all of them already sitting in the global styles. Now, if there's something specific I want to change, then of course I use my wrapper to target it. Hopefully that makes sense. And in this case, I also want to add that on submit right away. So once we submit the form, we have here the event, and I want to fire on submit. That's the dummy function that we just created. Then I want to display my logo. And what's really cool that we have the component right now. So voila, we right away have it. And then we'll have the heading 3, which eventually will have a value that will toggle. But at the moment, let's just hard code logo, or you know what, let's just say login. I don't know why I said logo. And then let's create that input field, the one that we will eventually set up as a separate component. So let's create this one. And I'll talk about why we want to set up as a separate component in the next video. So let's create this one, and then also the button. So back in the register, right after the login, I want to add a comment. I'll say name input. And yes, eventually we'll actually toggle this one. But for time being, we just want to go with div. And in here, I'm going to go with form row. That's the div. And again, this is coming from global classes. And if you want to check them out, you know where to find them. And then in here, let's go with label. Now for the label, we'll need the for attribute, or in React HTML for attribute. We'll pass in the name because that will be the name of my input. And I do want to add a little bit of styling. So we'll say here form label. Now, as far as the text, in this case, I'm going to go with name. Let's save that. And we can nicely see the label. Then right after label, we'll go with input. And then type will be text. And value, well, value is actually sitting here in the initial state. More specifically, it's sitting in the values now, since we used use state, correct? So we go here with value. And then we're looking for values and then dot name. Now we also want to pass in the actual name because this is our access with our event object. So we have handle change. At the moment we just have target. Great. But eventually we will access both the value as well as the name. So that's why it's important here for us to add the proper one. So this one will be name. And then let's add two more things. On change. So on change. So every time we do something with this input, we'll fire that one. And then we want to run our handle change, correct? And then also I want to add a little bit of styling. So we're going to go here with class name, and that will be equal to a form and input. Let's save that one. And then lastly, we want to also add the button. So let's go here with button, then type will be submit. And just go here with submit. And then let's add two classes. So those will be global classes. So we're looking for BTN and then BTN block. And as far as the name, we'll just go with submit. Let's save that one. And now let's just test it out whether our logic works. So I'm going to navigate right now to the localhost. And then I'm looking more specifically to a register. That's the one. And then I want to open up the console. I want to see whether all my logic works. Because essentially what should happen every time we type something, we should see the form, which is a great start. Like I said, once we can access the target, then we can grab both things. We can grab the name and we can grab the value. And second, once we submit, we should see the form. And voila, of course we do. So that's the target in this case once we submit. And with this in place, now we can start separating things into a separate components.